Synchronicity is one of the most unsettling words in science. It was coined by Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, in collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli, one of the greatest physicists of the 20th century and a Nobel laureate. Together, in 1952, they published a book that most scientists refused to read, and most philosophers refused to take seriously. The book argued that the universe contains a category of events that are not caused by anything, not by physical forces, not by hidden variables, not by coincidence, not by chance, and yet are deeply, undeniably meaningful. Events that are connected not by cause and effect but by meaning. Events that should not happen according to any statistical model, and yet happen with a regularity that borders on the impossible. Jung called these events synchronicities, and what makes them so unsettling is not that they happen. It is that science has no framework to explain them, and yet the most fundamental theory in physics, quantum mechanics, describes exactly the same kind of connection. The simplest definition of synchronicity is this: a meaningful coincidence that cannot be explained by causation. You think of someone you have not spoken to in years, and they call you within minutes. You dream of a specific, unusual event, and it happens the next day. You encounter the same rare symbol, a word, a number, an image 3 times in a single afternoon, each time in an unrelated context, and the symbol turns out to be directly relevant to a decision you are struggling with. These are not causal events. You did not cause the phone to ring by thinking about the person. You did not cause the dream to come true. You did not cause the symbol to appear. And yet the timing, the specificity, and the personal relevance of these events make pure coincidence feel like an inadequate explanation. Something else is happening. Something that connects events across space and time without any visible mechanism. The standard scientific response to synchronicity is dismissal. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine, the argument goes. We are wired to find meaning in randomness. We remember the hits and forget the misses. If you think about 100 people over the course of a week, and one of them happens to call, you remember that call and forget the 99 who did not. This is called confirmation bias, and it is real. It is a well-documented cognitive phenomenon, and for many apparent synchronicities, it is almost certainly the correct explanation. But confirmation bias does not explain all synchronicities. It does not explain the cases where the specificity is so precise, the timing so exact, and the statistical probability so vanishingly small that selective memory cannot account for them. And it does not explain the laboratory evidence. The laboratory evidence begins at Princeton University. In 1979, Robert Jahn, a professor of aerospace engineering and the dean of Princeton's School of Engineering and Applied Science, established the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, known as PEAR. Jahn was not a psychologist. He was not a parapsychologist. He was a rocket scientist, literally. He had worked on ion propulsion systems for NASA. He had published extensively in plasma physics. He was, by every conventional measure, a rigorous, mainstream scientist, and he spent 28 years conducting one of the most carefully controlled experimental programs in the history of science, investigating whether human consciousness could influence physical systems without any known physical mechanism. The core experiment at PEAR was deceptively simple. A random event generator, an electronic device that produces a stream of truly random binary digits, ones and zeros, like an electronic coin flip, was placed in a room. A human participant sat near the device and attempted to mentally influence the output in a specific direction, more ones than zeros, or more zeros than ones. The participant did not touch the device, did not press any buttons, did not send any signals, simply intended for the output to shift in a particular direction. Over 28 years, PEAR conducted millions of trials with hundreds of participants. The result was a tiny but statistically significant deviation from chance. The effect size was small, roughly 1 part in 10,000, but it was consistent. It was replicable. It appeared across different operators, different devices, different locations, and different time periods. And it was statistically significant to a degree that, in any other field of science, would have been considered definitive proof of a real phenomenon. The probability that the overall PEAR dataset occurred by chance was less than 1 in a billion. Robert Jung published these results in peer-reviewed journals. He presented them at scientific conferences. He invited skeptics to examine his equipment, his protocols, his data. No one found methodological flaws that could account for the results. The most common criticism was not that the experiments were poorly designed. They were exceptionally well designed, but that the results were impossible. Consciousness cannot influence random physical systems. Therefore, the results must be wrong, regardless of the data. This is not a scientific argument, it is a philosophical one. It assumes the conclusion that consciousness cannot affect physical reality, and uses that assumption to reject evidence to the contrary. Jung spent nearly 3 decades producing data that challenged this assumption. The scientific establishment spent the same 3 decades refusing to engage with it, but PEAR was not alone. In 1998, Roger Nelson, a researcher who had worked at the PEAR laboratory, launched the Global Consciousness Project. The concept was an extension of Jung's work, scaled up to the entire planet. Nelson placed random event generators, the same type of devices used at PEAR, in locations around the world. 65 to 70 devices running continuously, producing streams of random data 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Under normal conditions, the outputs of these devices are uncorrelated. Each device produces its own independent stream of random data, unconnected to any other device. But Nelson hypothesized that during events of mass global attention, events that focus the consciousness of millions of people simultaneously, the random event generators would show unusual correlations. The random data would become less random. The independent devices would begin to behave as though they were connected. The results were remarkable. During the September 11 attacks in 2001, the network of random event generators showed a deviation from expected randomness that began approximately 4 to 5 hours before the first plane hit the World Trade Center. The deviation peaked during the attacks themselves and gradually returned to normal over the following days. The effect was not subtle. The network variance and measure of how much the independent devices were correlating with each other spiked to levels that the system had never recorded before. Nelson and his colleagues published the analysis in peer-reviewed journals, controlling for every artifact they could imagine: time zone effects, electromagnetic interference, temperature fluctuations, hardware malfunctions. None of these factors could account for the pattern. The devices were responding to something else entirely. During the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, during the inaugurations of presidents, during global meditation events, during the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, the same pattern emerged. Events that captured global attention produced measurable correlations in devices that had no physical connection to each other or to the events they were responding to. The statistical significance of the global consciousness project's cumulative dataset, as of its most recent analyses, is extraordinary. The probability that the overall pattern of correlations occurred by chance is less than 1 in a trillion. This is not a marginal result. This is not a trend that might or might not be real. By the standards applied to particle physics, where a result is considered a discovery at 5 sigma, a probability of roughly 1 in 3.5 million, the Global Consciousness Project's results exceed the discovery threshold by several orders of magnitude, and yet the scientific mainstream has largely ignored these results. Not because the methodology was flawed, The project's protocols are publicly available. The data is open source. Anyone can analyze it, not because the statistical analysis was incorrect. Independent statisticians have verified the numbers, but because the results imply something that current physics cannot accommodate, that consciousness is not confined to individual brains, that it can correlate with physical systems at a distance, and that meaning, not force, not energy, not information in the conventional sense, is a connective principle in the physical world. This is exactly what Jung meant by synchronicity. A connection that is not causal but meaningful. A correlation that has no mechanism and yet occurs with statistical regularity. The Global Consciousness Project did not set out to prove synchronicity. It set out to test whether consciousness affects physical systems. But what it found was something deeper evidence that consciousness and physical reality are correlated in ways that have no causal explanation. The random event generators do not respond to the physical energy of global events. They are shielded, isolated, independent. They respond to something else, to attention, to meaning, to the collective focus of millions of minds on a single event. This is synchronicity measured in a laboratory, meaningful correlation without causation. Bohm added another dimension. Bohm is a social psychologist at Cornell University, one of the most prestigious psychology departments in the world. In 2011, he published a paper in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, one of the most prestigious journals in his field, reporting the results of 9 experiments conducted over 8 years with more than 1,000 participants. The experiments tested precognition, the ability to be influenced by events that have not yet happened. In one experiment, participants were shown a screen with 2 curtains and asked to guess which curtain concealed an image. The image was randomly assigned by a computer after the participant made their choice. By chance, participants should have been correct 50% of the time. They were correct 53.1% of the time, but only when the hidden image was erotic. For neutral images, the hit rate was exactly at chance. The participants were not consciously predicting the future. Their accuracy was driven by emotional arousal by the future emotional significance of the image they had not yet seen. The future was influencing the present. Meaning was traveling backward in time. Bohm's experimental design was not limited to the curtain task. In another experiment, participants were shown a list of words and asked to memorize them. After the memory test, the computer randomly selected a subset of the words for additional practice. Bohm found that participants were significantly better at remembering the words that they would later practice words selected by a random process that had not yet occurred at the time of the memory test. The future practice session retroactively improved the past memory performance. In yet another experiment, participants were shown an image briefly flashed on a screen, too briefly for conscious recognition. They were then asked to choose between 2 options. When the briefly flashed image matched one of the options, a match determined randomly after the participant's choice. Participants chose the matching option at rates significantly above chance. Their unconscious processing was influenced by a future random event. Bohm's paper ignited a firestorm. Not because the methodology was weak. Bohm was a meticulous researcher with decades of experience, and the paper passed rigorous peer review. The firestorm occurred because the results, if true, implied that causation can run backward, that the future can influence the present. That temporal order, the bedrock assumption that causes precede effects, might not be absolute. Subsequent replication attempts produced mixed results. Some replicated Bohm's findings, others did not. A large-scale replication attempt in 2012 found no significant effect, but a meta-analysis published in 2015 aggregating 90 experiments by 33 laboratories across 14 countries, found a small but statistically significant overall effect in the direction Bohm predicted. The debate continues. But the data, taken as a whole, does not support the simple conclusion that precognition does not exist. It supports the more uncomfortable conclusion that something is happening that we do not understand. What connects PEAR, the Global Consciousness Project, and Bohm's experiments is not their specific findings. It is the pattern. In all three cases, the evidence points to connections between events that cannot be explained by any known causal mechanism. Consciousness correlating with random physical systems. Physical devices correlating with each other during events of collective attention. Future events correlating with present choices. These are not causal connections. No force is transmitted. No energy is exchanged. No signal travels from point A to point B. And yet the correlations are real, measurable, statistically significant, and replicable. They are, in the most precise sense of Jung's term, synchronistic, connected by meaning rather than by mechanism. Jung himself understood this. He did not propose synchronicity as a mystical concept. He proposed it as an empirical one, a category of events that exist in nature and demand explanation. His collaboration with Pauli was not casual. Pauli was one of the founders of quantum mechanics. He had formulated the exclusion principle, one of the most fundamental laws in physics. He understood, perhaps better than any physicist of his generation, that quantum mechanics had introduced something into physics that physics was not prepared for: correlations without causes. Two entangled particles, measured at opposite ends of the universe, showing perfectly correlated results with no signal passing between them. No force, no energy, no mechanism, just correlation, just connection, just meaning, if you are willing to use that word. Pauli was willing. In his correspondence with Jung, hundreds of letters spanning decades, Pauli repeatedly argued that quantum mechanics and synchronicity were manifestations of the same underlying principle. The acausal connection between entangled particles and the acausal connection between synchronistic events were, in Pauli's view, different expressions of a single reality, a reality in which causation is not the only ordering principle, a reality in which meaning, pattern, and connection exist independently of mechanism. Pauli called this the psychophysical unity, a level of reality deeper than either physics or psychology, from which both the physical world and the psychological world emerge as complementary aspects of a single whole. This was not mysticism. This was one of the greatest physicists in history, operating at the peak of his intellectual powers, telling his colleagues that the theory they had built, quantum mechanics, implied something far more radical than they were willing to admit. It implied that the universe is not a machine. It is not a collection of separate objects interacting through forces. It is a web of meaning, a pattern of connections that transcends space, time, and causation, and synchronicity, those impossible, meaningful, causal coincidences that every human being has experienced, is evidence of that web. The question that remains, the question that drives this entire investigation, is whether this is merely a suggestive analogy or something deeper. Are quantum correlations and human synchronicities really the same kind of phenomenon? Is the entanglement between particles related to the entanglement between events in a human life? Is there a physical mechanism that connects quantum non-locality to the meaningful coincidences that Jung described? Or are these two separate mysteries that merely resemble each other? To answer this, we need to go deeper into the quantum mechanics. We need to understand exactly what non-locality means, exactly what Bell's theorem proved, and exactly why the greatest physicist of the 20th century, Albert Einstein, called quantum entanglement spooky action at a distance and refused to believe it was real. We need to understand David Bohm's implicate order, a framework that may be the missing bridge between quantum physics and synchronicity. And we need to examine a possibility that most scientists will not even consider, that the universe is not merely a physical system, but a meaningful one. That connection, pattern, and purpose are woven into the fabric of reality itself. Because if that is true, if meaning is as fundamental as matter and energy, then synchronicity is not a cognitive illusion. It is not confirmation bias. It is not a statistical artifact. It is a window into the deepest structure of the universe. And the traditions that have spoken of divine providence, of cosmic order, of a hidden hand, guiding events toward meaning, traditions spanning every culture and every century of human history, were describing something real, something that physics is only now beginning to measure. The evidence is here, the data is here. The question is whether we are willing to follow it. Jung arrived at synchronicity through clinical observation. For decades, in his practice in Zurich, he encountered patients who reported coincidences so precise, so personally relevant, and so statistically improbable that he could not dismiss them as noise. The most famous case involved a young woman highly rational, intellectually rigid, resistant to any framework that challenged her materialist worldview. She was recounting a dream in which someone had given her a golden scarab, a specific type of beetle with deep symbolic significance in Egyptian mythology, representing transformation and rebirth. As she described the dream, Jung heard a tapping at the window. He opened it, and a scarabæid beetle, a rose chafer, the closest equivalent to a golden scarab in the Swiss climate, flew into the room. Jung caught it and handed it to his patient. "Here is your scarab," he said. The woman's rational defenses cracked. The coincidence was too precise, too perfectly timed, too personally meaningful to be dismissed. And it catalyzed the breakthrough that months of conventional therapy had failed to produce. Jung collected hundreds of such cases. A patient dreams of a fox, and a real fox appears in their garden the next morning for the first time in 20 years of living in that house. A woman struggling with a decision about her marriage repeatedly encounters the number 47 in unrelated contexts on license plates, in phone numbers, on receipts, and discovers that 47 is the exact number of years her grandmother's marriage lasted before ending in a transformation that mirrors her own situation. A man contemplating a career change picks up a book at random in a library, opens it to a random page, and finds a passage that addresses his exact dilemma in language so specific that it reads like a personal letter. These are anecdotes. Science does not build on anecdotes. Jung knew this. That is why he sought out Pauli. He needed a physicist, not just any physicist, but one who understood that the foundations of physical reality had already been shattered by quantum mechanics. Pauli was that physicist. He had watched the classical worldview, the deterministic, mechanistic, cause and effect universe of Newton collapse under the weight of quantum evidence. He had personally contributed to that collapse. The Pauli exclusion principle, which governs the behavior of every electron in every atom in the universe, is not a causal law in the classical sense. It does not say that one electron pushes another away. It says that two electrons cannot occupy the same quantum state period. No mechanism, no force, just a fundamental constraint on reality that has no deeper explanation. Pauli understood, at the deepest level, that physics had already discovered a causal ordering principles. Synchronicity, he believed, was another one. Their collaboration produced the 1952 book, The Interpretation of Nature and the Psyche, half written by Jung, half by Pauli. Jung's section laid out the concept of synchronicity with clinical and theoretical rigor. He distinguished synchronicity carefully from mere coincidence. A synchronicity, he argued, requires three elements: temporal coincidence, meaningful connection, and acausality. Two events must occur at roughly the same time. They must be connected by meaning personal, symbolic, or archetypal significance to the person experiencing them, and they must not be connected by any known causal chain. Remove any one of these elements and you have something else. A lucky guess, a pattern recognition error, an ordinary cause and effect sequence. Only when all three are present do you have a synchronicity. Pauli's section, an essay on the influence of archetypal ideas on Kepler's scientific theories, argued that the boundary between physics and psychology is not as solid as either discipline assumes. The psyche and the physical world, Pauli suggested, are complementary aspects of a deeper reality, just as the wave and particle descriptions of quantum objects are complementary aspects of a single entity. Neither the physical description nor the psychological description is complete on its own. Reality requires both. The scientific community reacted with embarrassment. Jung was already suspect in the eyes of mainstream psychology. His theories of archetypes and the collective unconscious were considered too speculative, too close to mysticism. Pauli's participation lent the project scientific credibility, but it also risked Pauli's reputation. Colleagues warned him. Some distanced themselves. The book was reviewed, discussed, and then quietly shelved. It became one of those works that everyone has heard of, and almost no one has read. But the experiments that followed decades later, conducted by researchers who had never read Jung and Pauli's book, produced results that align with their predictions with uncomfortable precision. Consider the details of the PEAR laboratory more carefully. Robert Jahn did not simply run one experiment. He ran variations designed to eliminate every conceivable alternative explanation. He tested whether the effect depended on the operator's proximity to the device. It did not. Operators could influence the random event generators from thousands of miles away from different continents with the same effect size as when they sat in the same room. He tested whether the effect depended on timing. It did not. Operators could register their intention hours or even days before the random event generator ran, before the random data was even generated and the data still showed the predicted deviation. This is called a time-displaced effect, and it has the same structure as Bohm's precognition experiments. The future intention influences the past data, causation running backward, temporal order dissolved. Jahn also discovered something unexpected about the relationship between pairs of operators. When two people who had an emotional bond, close friends, romantic partners, family members worked together to influence a random event generator, the effect was not merely doubled, it was multiplied. The bonded pairs produced effect sizes roughly 6 times larger than the combined effects of the same two individuals working separately. The emotional connection between the operators amplified the anomalous effect in a way that no mechanistic model could explain. The devices were not responding to physical energy, they were responding to relationship, to connection, to something that exists between people, something invisible, unmeasurable by any conventional instrument, and yet capable of producing a measurable physical effect. This finding resonates with the Global Consciousness Project's results in a striking way. The random event generators in Nelson's global network do not respond to all events equally. They respond most strongly to events that produce emotional coherence, events where millions of people feel the same emotion simultaneously. The September 11 attacks, the death of Nelson Mandela, the earthquake that struck Nepal. These events produced powerful deviations in the random data, but events of equal or greater objective significance that do not produce emotional coherence, complex geopolitical negotiations, gradual economic shifts, technical scientific discoveries produce little or no effect. The devices are not measuring the physical magnitude of events. They are measuring something about the collective emotional state of humanity. They are measuring coherence, resonance, shared meaning. And here is where the skeptical explanation, confirmation bias, selective memory, pattern recognition, run amok fails completely. Random event generators do not have confirmation bias. They do not have memories. They do not recognize patterns. They are electronic devices that produce binary data according to quantum mechanical noise processes. They are as close to pure objectivity as any instrument in science, and they are showing correlations with human consciousness that have no causal explanation. Dean Radin, chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences and one of the most rigorous researchers in consciousness studies, has spent decades compiling meta-analyses of these experiments. His analysis of the PEAR data, the Global Consciousness Project, the Bohm experiments, and dozens of other experimental programs converges on a consistent conclusion. The effects are real, small, and replicable. They do not depend on the beliefs of the experimenter. They do not depend on the methodology the effects appear across different experimental designs, different random number generation methods, different analytical frameworks. They depend on consciousness, on attention, on intention, on meaning. What is particularly striking about Radin's meta-analytic work is the consistency across decades. The effect sizes do not diminish over time, a pattern you would expect if the results were artifacts of methodological improvement or declining novelty. The 2015 meta-analysis of Bohm-type experiments, conducted by Patrizio Tresoldi and colleagues, included 90 experiments from 33 laboratories in 14 countries. The overall effect size was small, a Hedges G of approximately 0.09, but it was statistically significant, and it showed no evidence of decline across the years of data collection. Whatever the experiments are measuring, it is not going away. It is not a fashion in experimental design. It is a persistent feature of the relationship between consciousness and physical systems. Radin has also conducted his own experiments on what he calls Presentiment, a physiological version of Bohm's Precognition findings. In these experiments, a participant sits in front of a screen, while their skin conductance, heart rate, and other physiological markers are monitored. The screen shows a random sequence of images, some calm, some emotionally arousing. The computer selects the images randomly after the physiological measurements are taken. And yet, consistently, participants show elevated physiological arousal 2 to 3 seconds before emotionally arousing images appear before the computer has even selected the image. Their bodies respond to a future event that has not yet been determined. This is not ESP in the traditional sense. The participants are not consciously aware of what is coming. Their conscious minds do not predict the image, but their bodies, their autonomic nervous systems, operating below the threshold of awareness, respond to the emotional significance of a future event as though that event had already occurred. The implications are staggering. If the body can respond to events that have not yet happened, if physiological systems can detect the emotional significance of a future stimulus before the stimulus exists, then the flow of information in the universe is not limited to the past to future direction that classical physics assumes. Information flows in both directions. The future influences the present, meaning connects events across time, and the boundary between what has happened and what will happen is not a wall. It is a membrane permeable, flexible, and transparent to whatever it is that carries meaning across temporal boundaries. This is the empirical foundation of synchronicity. Not anecdotes, though the anecdotes are compelling, not philosophy, though the philosophical implications are profound. Data. Millions of experimental trials, thousands of participants, decades of replication, statistical significance that exceeds the standards used to announce the discovery of the Higgs boson. And yet this data remains at the margins of science, not because it has been refuted, but because it implies something that the current scientific paradigm cannot accommodate. It implies that consciousness matters. That meaning is real. That the connections between events in your life, the coincidences that feel too perfect to be random, the encounters that arrive at exactly the moment you need them, the patterns that emerge when you are paying attention, may be something more than the noise of a random universe interpreted by a pattern-hungry brain. They may be signals. Faint, subtle, easily missed but real. Signals from a level of reality that physics is only beginning to detect. Jung sensed this. Pauli knew it. The random event generators measure it. And the next question, the question that quantum mechanics forces us to confront, is what kind of universe produces such signals? What kind of reality connects events not by forces but by meaning? What kind of physics allows the future to influence the present, allows consciousness to correlate with random systems, allows two bonded humans to produce effects that neither can produce alone? The answer, as we will see, lies in the deepest and most disturbing discovery in the history of physics: quantum non-locality. The proof that the universe is not made of separate parts. The proof that everything, at the most fundamental level, is already connected. And it is worth noting as a whisper, before the full exploration to come, that this idea is not new. 2,000 years before Bell's theorem, before random event generators, before Princeton laboratories and statistical meta-analyses, the traditions had a word for it. The Christians called it providence, the hidden hand of God arranging events toward purposes that the human mind cannot see. Augustine of Hippo, in the 5th century, wrote that there is no such thing as chance, only the unfolding of a divine order too vast for any single mind to comprehend. The Buddhists called it pratityasamutpada, dependent origination, the teaching that nothing arises independently, that every event is connected to every other event in a web of mutual causation so intricate that separating cause from effect becomes meaningless. The word coincidence, in a Buddhist framework, is not an explanation. It is a confession of ignorance, an admission that you cannot see the connections that are already there. These are not metaphors. They are descriptions. And as we go deeper into the quantum mechanics of non-locality, into the mathematics of entanglement, into the theoretical framework that may finally unite physics and meaning, we will discover that the traditions were not speaking poetically. They were speaking precisely about a universe that is far stranger, far more connected, and far more meaningful than anything the classical scientific worldview ever imagined. In 1935, Albert Einstein published a paper that he believed would destroy quantum mechanics. The paper, co-authored with Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, described a thought experiment so bizarre, so fundamentally at odds with everything physics had established about the nature of reality, that Einstein was certain it constituted a proof by absurdity, a demonstration that quantum mechanics must be incomplete. The thought experiment involved two particles that had interacted and then separated. According to quantum mechanics, measuring one particle would instantly determine the state of the other particle, regardless of the distance between them. Not after a signal had travelled from one to the other, not after light had carried information across the gap. Instantly, simultaneously, as though the two particles were not really two particles at all, but a single entity wearing two masks. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. He meant it as an insult. He meant it as proof that quantum mechanics was missing something, some hidden variable, some deeper mechanism that would explain the correlation without invoking the absurdity of instantaneous connection across arbitrary distances. The alternative, that the universe actually works this way, that measurement here can instantaneously affect reality there, with no signal, no force, no causal mechanism, was, in Einstein's words, too ghostly to be taken seriously. It violated locality, the principle that an object can only be directly influenced by its immediate surroundings. It violated the speed of light, the cosmic speed limit that Einstein himself had established. It violated common sense. And Einstein, for all his revolutionary brilliance, believed that common sense, at some deep level, must be right. He was wrong. It took 3 decades to prove it, but he was wrong. In 1964, a physicist named John Stuart Bell, working at CERN in Geneva, published a theorem that transformed the foundations of physics. Bell's theorem is not a theory, it is not a hypothesis, it is not a model. It is a mathematical proof as rigorous and as certain as the Pythagorean theorem. And what it proves is this: if the predictions of quantum mechanics are correct, then no theory of local hidden variables can explain the correlations between entangled particles. In plain language, Bell proved that Einstein's hope, the hope that some deeper local causal mechanism would explain entanglement, is mathematically impossible. The correlations predicted by quantum mechanics are too strong, too specific, and too perfectly coordinated to be produced by any mechanism that operates within the constraints of locality and classical causation. Bell derived an inequality, a mathematical relationship that must hold if the universe is local and realistic. Local means that events at one location cannot instantaneously influence events at another. Realistic means that particles have definite properties before they are measured, that measurement reveals pre-existing facts rather than creating them. If the universe is both local and realistic, then the correlations between entangled particles cannot exceed a certain limit. Bell calculated that limit, and quantum mechanics predicts correlations that exceed it. The question was, which is right, Bell's inequality or quantum mechanics? The experiments began in the 1970s. John Clauser at the University of California, Berkeley, and Stuart Friedman conducted the first practical test of Bell's inequality in 1972, measuring polarization correlations between pairs of entangled photons. The results violated Bell's inequality. The quantum mechanical prediction was confirmed. Locality, realism, or both had to be abandoned. But the experiment had loopholes, technical gaps that allowed a committed skeptic to argue that the results might be explained by some subtle classical mechanism. Alain Aspect closed the most important loopholes. Working at the Institut d'Optique in Orsay, France, in 1982, Aspect conducted a series of experiments that are now considered among the most important in the history of physics. His key innovation was the use of fast-switching analyzers, devices that changed the measurement settings while the entangled photons were already in flight. This closed the locality loophole, the possibility that the particles could somehow communicate with each other during the measurement process. The measurement settings were chosen too late and too quickly for any signal, even a signal traveling at the speed of light, to carry information from one detector to the other. And yet the correlations persisted. The entangled photons behaved as though they knew what the distant detector was measuring, even though no signal could have told them. The results were unambiguous. Bell's inequality was violated by a margin consistent with quantum mechanical predictions and inconsistent with any local realistic theory. The experiments have been repeated and refined hundreds of times since Aspect's work. Each generation of experiments closed loopholes that the previous generation had left open, and each time the result was the same. The universe violates Bell's inequality. Nature is non-local. In 2015, a team at Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands, led by Ronald Hansen, conducted what is widely considered the definitive Bell test, simultaneously closing all known loopholes in a single experiment. The experiment was a masterpiece of precision. Entangled electrons were trapped in nitrogen vacancy centers in diamond crystals, separated by 1.3 kilometers on the Delft campus, far enough apart that light itself could not travel between them during the measurement. Window. Random number generators at each station determined which property of each electron would be measured, and the random choices were made so late that no signal, traveling at or below the speed of light, could carry the choice from one station to the other before both measurements were completed. Every conceivable loophole, the locality loophole, the detection loophole, the freedom of choice loophole, was closed simultaneously. The results violated Bell's inequality with a statistical significance that left no room for doubt. The same year, independent groups in Vienna, led by Anton Zeilinger, and at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in Boulder, Colorado, led by Lyndon Shalm, conducted their own loophole-free Bell tests with entangled photons using different experimental designs. Both confirmed the violation. In 2017, a group called the Big Bell Test went further. They used the random choices of over 100,000 human participants around the world to determine the measurement settings, eliminating the possibility that the random number generators themselves were somehow conspiring to produce the result. The violation held. In every variation, with every refinement, under every conceivable constraint, nature refused to comply with Bell's inequality. Non-locality is not an artifact of imperfect experiments. It is a feature of reality. In 2022, Aspect, Clauser, and Anton Zeilinger received the Nobel Prize in Physics for their work. The Nobel Committee's citation was explicit. They were awarded the prize for establishing the violation of Bell inequalities and pioneering quantum information science. What does this mean? It means that the universe is non-local. It means that entangled particles are connected in a way that transcends space. When you measure one entangled particle, the other particle, whether it is across the room or across the galaxy, instantaneously assumes a correlated state. Not after a delay, not after a signal. Instantaneously. The correlation is not carried by any force. It is not mediated by any field. It is not transmitted by any particle. It simply is. The two particles are connected by something that has no name in classical physics, something that violates every intuition about how objects in space should behave. The philosophical implications are staggering. For 3 centuries, physics had operated on the assumption that the universe is fundamentally local, that what happens here is determined by conditions here, not by conditions on the other side of the cosmos. Locality was not just a technical assumption, it was the foundation of the entire scientific worldview. It meant that the universe could be understood by studying its parts separately. It meant that if you understood the laws governing small regions of space, you could, in principle, reconstruct the behavior of the whole. It meant that the universe was a machine, a vast, intricate, but ultimately decomposable machine whose parts could be analyzed independently. Bell's theorem destroyed this picture, not by introducing a new speculation, by proving, with mathematical certainty, that the parts of the universe are not independent. They cannot be analyzed separately. The behavior of one part depends, instantaneously and irrevocably, on the behavior of distant parts. The universe is not a machine. It is a web. And here is the critical point, the point that most popular accounts of quantum mechanics obscure or ignore entirely. Non-locality is not just a property of exotic laboratory experiments with entangled photons. It is a property of the universe itself. Every particle that has ever interacted with another particle is, in principle, entangled with it. Every atom in your body has interacted with other atoms in the air you breathe, the food you eat, the ground you walk on. Those interactions create entanglement. That entanglement does not disappear when the atoms separate. It persists. It fades quantum decoherence, reduces the practical observability of entanglement in warm, noisy environments, but it does not vanish. The entanglement is still there, woven into the quantum state of the universe like threads in an infinite tapestry. The physicist John Wheeler, one of the most creative thinkers in 20th century physics, put it bluntly. He said that we live in a participatory universe, a universe in which observation is not passive but constitutive. The act of measurement does not reveal a pre-existing reality. It participates in creating reality. And the entanglement between particles means that this participation is not local. It is global. A measurement here affects reality there. A choice made in this laboratory constrains what can happen in that laboratory instantly, regardless of distance. Wheeler went further. In his delayed choice experiment, first proposed as a thought experiment in 1978 and later confirmed in laboratory experiments, most notably by Aspects Group in 2007, and by a team at the Australian National University, Wheeler showed that the choice of how to measure a photon can retroactively determine what the photon did in the past. A photon that has already passed through a double slit already committed, in some sense, to travelling through one slit or both can be forced to change its history by a measurement made after it has completed its journey. The future measurement determines the past behaviour. Causation runs backward. Time, at the quantum level, does not flow in one direction. Wheeler was so struck by this result that he spent his later years developing the idea of genesis by observership, the proposal that observers in the far future may be responsible, through a cosmic version of the delayed choice effect, for bringing the universe into existence in the distant past. The present does not merely arise from the past. The past arises from the present, and the future, reaching backward through quantum mechanics, participates in creating both. This is retrocausality, the same phenomenon that Bohm's experiments detected in human cognition, and that Jung's PEAR laboratory found in time-displaced intention experiments. The future influencing the present reshaping the past. Time, at the most fundamental level of physical reality, is not a one-way street. It is a web, a network, a fabric in which past, present, and future are interconnected, and in which the direction of influence is not fixed. There is another layer to the quantum picture that most popular accounts omit, and it may be the most relevant to synchronicity. In quantum field theory, the vacuum of space is not empty. It is seething, with activity virtual particles appearing and disappearing, quantum fields fluctuating, energy borrowing and repaying itself on timescales too brief to measure directly, and these vacuum fluctuations are correlated. The vacuum state of a quantum field exhibits what physicists call long-range correlations, correlations between points in space that persist even when the points are separated by enormous distances. This is not entanglement in the familiar sense of two particles prepared together in a laboratory. This is a structural feature of the quantum vacuum itself. The ground state of any quantum field, the state of lowest energy, the state that exists everywhere, all the time, even in the emptiest regions of space, contains correlations that extend across space-time. The quantum vacuum is not a collection of independent points. It is a single, correlated, holistic entity. Disturbances at one point are not fully independent of conditions at distant points. The vacuum remembers, in a sense. It connects. The physicist Yakir Aharonov, one of the most creative thinkers in the foundations of quantum mechanics, has developed a framework called the two-state vector formalism that makes retrocausality mathematically explicit. In Aharonov's framework, every quantum event is determined by two boundary conditions, one from the past and one from the future. The present is not solely the product of past causes. It is the intersection of past influences flowing forward and future influences flowing backward. Both directions contribute to what happens now. The future does not merely follow from the present, it shapes it. Aharonov's formalism is not speculative. It is mathematically rigorous, experimentally testable, and consistent with all known quantum predictions. It has been verified in weak measurement experiments, a technique Aharonov himself pioneered, in which the subtle influence of future measurement choices on present quantum states can be directly observed. The experiments, conducted by groups at Tel Aviv University, the University of Toronto, and the University of Vienna, confirm that quantum systems behave as though they are influenced by both past preparation and future measurement. The arrow of time, at the quantum level, points in both directions simultaneously. Now consider what this means for synchronicity. Jung defined synchronicity as an causal connecting principle, a form of connection that does not operate through the causal chains of classical physics. Quantum non-locality is exactly such a principle. Entangled particles are connected acausally. No force travels between them. No signal is sent. No energy is exchanged. And yet they are correlated, their behaviors are linked in ways that cannot be explained by any local causal mechanism. Bell proved it, Aspect measured it, the Nobel Committee certified it. The universe contains acausal connections. This is no longer philosophy. It is experimental fact. But is the acausal connection between entangled particles the same kind of acausal connection that Jung described between synchronistic events in human experience? This is where David Bohm enters the picture, and where the investigation deepens from remarkable to profound. David Bohm was one of the most original physicists of the 20th century, a protege of Robert Oppenheimer at Berkeley, a colleague of Einstein at Princeton, and later a professor at Birkbeck College in London. Bohm developed an interpretation of quantum mechanics that most physicists found too radical to accept, and yet could not refute. His personal history shaped his thinking in ways that are relevant to our investigation. McCarthyism drove him from the United States in the 1950s. He was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, refused to testify against colleagues, and lost his position at Princeton. He spent years in exile in Brazil and Israel before settling in London. The experience of displacement, of being severed from a homeland, of discovering that the boundaries he had taken for granted were not real, found its way into his physics. Bohm became obsessed with wholeness, with the idea that the separations we perceive between nations, between disciplines, between particles are superficial features of a deeper unity. Bohm's interpretation, known as the ontological interpretation, or the pilot wave theory, proposes that quantum particles have definite positions at all times, guided by a wave function that extends through all of space. The wave function acts as an information field. It does not push the particle with force, but informs the particle of the entire experimental setup, including distant detectors and measurement settings. This is how Bohm explained non-locality without violating the spirit of physics. The information is everywhere, all at once, because the wave function is everywhere, all at once. But Bohm did not stop there. In 1980, he published Wholeness and the Implicate Order, a book that proposed a radically new framework for understanding reality. Bohm argued that the universe has two orders, the explicate order and the implicate order. The explicate order is the world we see, the world of separate objects, distinct events, individual particles, isolated human beings. The implicate order is the deeper reality from which the explicate order unfolds, a reality in which everything is enfolded into everything else, in which separation is an illusion, and in which the whole is contained in every part. Bohm illustrated the implicate order with a famous demonstration. Imagine a cylinder filled with glycerin, a thick, viscous fluid. Place a drop of ink on the surface and begin rotating the cylinder slowly. The ink drop stretches, thins, and eventually disappears. It becomes invisible, distributed throughout the glycerin in a pattern too diffuse to see. The ink has been enfolded into the glycerin. Now reverse the rotation. Slowly, the ink reconstitutes. The drop reappears exactly where it was, exactly as it was. It has unfolded from the glycerin. The information about the drop was never lost. It was always there, encoded in the detailed configuration of the fluid, invisible to the eye, but recoverable by reversing the process. The explicate order is the visible drop. The implicate order is the encoded, invisible, distributed pattern. And the unfolding the process by which the implicate becomes explicate is what we experience as the flow of events in time. Bohm also used the analogy of a hologram. In a hologram, every fragment contains the entire image. Cut a hologram in half, and you do not get half the image, you get the entire image at lower resolution. The information about the whole is distributed throughout every part. Bohm proposed that the universe works the same way. Every region of space contains information about every other region. Every particle contains information about every other particle. The separateness that we perceive this object here, that event there, this person in this city, that person in that city, is a feature of the explicate order, the unfolded surface of reality. Beneath the surface, in the implicate order, everything is already connected. Everything is already one. In this framework, synchronicity is not mysterious. It is inevitable. If the implicate order is real, if the deeper level of reality is a web of total interconnection, then events that appear separate in the explicate order may be connected in the implicate order. A thought in your mind and a phone call from a distant friend, a dream and a next day event, a symbol that appears repeatedly in unrelated contexts. In the explicate order, these events have no causal connection. They are separate, random, coincidental. But in the implicate order, they may be aspects of a single enfolded pattern, a pattern that unfolds into the explicate order as apparently separate events that are, at a deeper level, one event. Bohm and the neuroscientist Karl Pribram developed this idea further. Pribram had spent decades searching for the location of memory in the brain. Following the work of Carl Lashley, who had systematically destroyed portions of rat brains and found that memories were not localized in any specific region, Pribram proposed the holonomic brain theory. Memory, Pribram argued, is not stored in specific neurons. It is distributed holographically across the brain, just as information is distributed holographically across a hologram. Damage any part of the brain, and the memories become fuzzier, less detailed, but they do not disappear. Just as cutting a hologram in half produces the entire image at lower resolution, damaging the brain degrades memories without erasing them. The information is everywhere. The memory is in the whole. Bohm's implicate order and Pribram's holographic brain converged on a single extraordinary insight. The brain may be a receiver tuned to the holographic structure of the universe. Consciousness may not be produced by the brain. It may be the brain's way of accessing the implicate order, the deeper reality, in which everything is connected and everything is enfolded into everything else. The brain, in this view, does not generate consciousness the way a factory generates products. It transduces consciousness the way a radio transduces signals. The signal, the implicate order, the web of meaning and connection exists independently of the brain. The brain simply tunes in. This is speculative. It must be clearly stated that neither Bohm nor Pribram proved this hypothesis. It remains a theoretical framework, one of several competing interpretations of the relationship between consciousness and physical reality. But it is a framework that is consistent with the experimental data. It explains why the PEAR experiments work regardless of distance. The implicate order is non-local. It explains why time-displaced intentions produce the same effects as real-time intentions. The implicate order is not bound by temporal sequence. It explains why bonded pairs amplify the effect. Emotional connection may represent a stronger coupling to the implicate order. And it explains synchronicity itself. Meaningful coincidences are moments when the implicate order surfaces into the explicate. When the deep connections between events become briefly visible, there is one more piece of the quantum puzzle that must be placed before we turn to the traditions. It comes from quantum information theory, one of the most active and successful branches of modern physics. The founding insight of quantum information theory is that information is not an abstraction. It is physical. It obeys physical laws. It cannot be created or destroyed. This is the principle of unitarity, one of the most fundamental laws in quantum mechanics, and it is non-local. Entangled particles share quantum information that cannot be decomposed into local parts. The physicist John Wheeler, the same Wheeler who proposed the delayed choice experiment, spent the final decades of his career arguing that information is the foundation of physical reality. His famous phrase, "it" from bit, captured the idea. Every physical thing, every particle, every field, every force derives its existence from information. The universe, in Wheeler's view, is not made of matter. It is made of information. And information, as quantum mechanics reveals, is fundamentally non-local, fundamentally holistic, and fundamentally interconnected. If Wheeler is right, if information is the ground of reality, then the meaningful connections that synchronicity reveals are not anomalies. They are features. A universe made of information is a universe in which connections between apparently separate events are built into the architecture of reality. The information that constitutes your thought and the information that constitutes a distant event are part of the same informational whole. Their correlation is not spooky, it is structural. It is what you would expect from a universe whose fundamental substance is not matter but meaning. This is where the physics lands. Non-locality is proven. Retrocausality is mathematically consistent and experimentally supported. The implicate order provides a framework in which synchronicity is a natural consequence of the deep structure of reality. Quantum information theory suggests that the universe is made of information, and information is inherently holistic, inherently connected, inherently meaningful. The pieces fit together with a coherence that is itself almost synchronistic. If this is even partially correct, then synchronicity has a mechanism, or, more precisely, a framework. Synchronistic events are moments when the implicate order shows through, moments when the enfolded connections between events, people, symbols, and meanings become briefly visible in the explicate order. The scarab beetle appearing at Jung's window was not caused by the patient's dream. It was connected to the patient's dream, connected at the implicate level, where the symbol of transformation and the living embodiment of that symbol are aspects of a single enfolded reality. Pauli would have recognized this. In his later writings, he described what he called the psychophysical problem, the mystery of how mind and matter relate. He argued that the psychophysical problem is not a problem of interaction mind pushing matter or matter producing mind, but a problem of correspondence. Mind and matter correspond because they arise from a common source. They are complementary aspects of a single underlying reality, just as wave and particle are complementary aspects of a quantum entity. Bohm's implicate order provides a name for that common source. The implicate order is neither physical nor mental, it is both, or, more accurately, it is the reality from which both the physical and the mental unfold as complementary manifestations. This correspondence between Bohm's physics and Pauli's intuition is remarkable because they arrived at it from opposite directions. Pauli reasoned from the causal nature of quantum correlations to the existence of a psychophysical unity. Bohm reasoned from the holistic structure of quantum mechanics to the existence of an implicate order. They met in the middle, at a level of reality where the distinction between physics and psychology dissolves, where meaning and mechanism are not opposites but partners, and where the meaningful coincidences that Jung catalogued are not anomalies but natural expressions of the deep structure of the universe. And now the question sharpens. If the implicate order is real, if the universe really does contain a deeper level of reality in which everything is connected, in which the separation between events is an illusion of the explicate order, in which meaning is woven into the fabric of reality itself, then the traditions should have noticed. Thousands of years of contemplative practice, thousands of years of careful observation of inner experience and outer events, thousands of years of attempting to discern the hidden order beneath the surface of the world. If the implicate order is real, the traditions should have described it. They should have mapped it. They should have developed languages and frameworks for navigating a reality in which nothing is truly separate and everything is meaningful. And they did. Every major contemplative tradition, from Christianity to Buddhism, from Hinduism to Daoism, describes a hidden order beneath the visible world. An order in which events are connected by meaning rather than by mechanism. An order in which the distinctions between self and other, between inner and outer, between mind and matter are not fundamental, but derivative appearances that arise from a deeper unity. Christianity calls it Providence, the doctrine that God governs all events, great and small, guiding them toward purposes that exceed human comprehension. Providence is not a vague sentiment. It is a precise theological claim that nothing happens by chance, that every event participates in a divine order, and that the apparent randomness of the world conceals a coherence visible only from the perspective of eternity. Thomas Aquinas, the most systematic theologian in the Christian tradition, argued in the Summa Theologica that divine providence extends to every particular event, including those that appear contingent or accidental. What we call coincidence, Aquinas argued, is our failure to perceive the causal chains that connect events at a level too deep for human intellect to follow. Replace the word causal chains with implicate order, and Aquinas' argument becomes Bohm's physics expressed in 13th century language. Buddhism arrives at the same destination through a different path. The doctrine of pratityasamutpada, dependent origination, is the central philosophical teaching of the Buddhist tradition. It states that nothing arises independently. Every event, every object, every thought, every moment of consciousness arises in dependence upon conditions, and those conditions themselves arise in dependence upon further conditions, in an infinite web of mutual causation that extends through all of space and all of time. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, one of the most expansive texts in the Mahayana tradition, this web is described through the image of Indra's net, an infinite network of jewels, each jewel reflecting every other jewel, each reflection containing reflections of reflections to infinity. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything contains everything. The part contains the whole. This is Bohm's holographic universe expressed in 5th century Buddhist imagery, and the convergence is precise enough to be startling. Hinduism speaks of Brahman, the ultimate reality underlying all phenomena, and of Maya, the illusion of separateness that conceals Brahman's unity. The Mandukya Upanishad declares that the distinction between the dreaming mind and the waking world is not fundamental. Both are manifestations of a single consciousness that pervades all things. The Bhagavad Gita teaches that the wise person sees the same self in all beings and all beings in the same self, a direct statement of the non-separability that Bell's theorem proved mathematically 2.5 millennia later. And Daoism, perhaps the most subtle of all, describes the Tao as the hidden order that governs the flow of events without force, without mechanism, without intention. The Tao does not cause things to happen, it allows them to unfold. Wu Wei, effortless action. Action in harmony with the Tao is not passivity. It is attunement to the implicate order. It is the art of aligning oneself with the deep structure of reality, so that events unfold with a naturalness and coherence that feels, from the outside, like miraculous coincidence. The Taoist sage does not force synchronicity. The sage lives in synchronicity because the sage lives in alignment with the order that produces it. The next step in this investigation is to enter these traditions fully, to hear their descriptions in detail, to map their languages against the physics of non-locality, the mathematics of entanglement, and the framework of the implicate order, and to ask whether the convergence between ancient contemplative insight and modern quantum physics is coincidence or synchronicity. Because if these traditions were not speaking metaphorically, if they were describing, in the languages available to them, the same non-local, holistic, meaning-saturated reality that quantum physics has now measured, then synchronicity is not merely a psychological phenomenon. It is not merely a quantum phenomenon. It is evidence that the deepest insights of human consciousness and the deepest equations of fundamental physics are pointing at the same truth. A truth so radical that neither science alone nor tradition alone can fully express it. A truth that requires both. Every major contemplative tradition in human history has described a hidden order beneath the surface of events. An order in which nothing happens by accident. An order in which the connections between things, between people, between moments, between the inner life of the mind and the outer life of the world are not random but meaningful. Not caused in the mechanical sense that classical physics assumes, but connected in a way that transcends mechanism, connected by significance, by pattern, by something that the traditions have given many names, but that points consistently across cultures and centuries to the same extraordinary claim that the universe is not indifferent, that it is structured by meaning, that the coincidences you experience, the ones too precise, too personal, too perfectly timed to dismiss, are not noise, they are signal. And the traditions have been reading that signal for thousands of years. Christianity begins with providence. The doctrine of divine providence is not peripheral to Christian theology. It is central as the doctrines of creation, incarnation, and redemption. Providence is the teaching that God governs all events, from the grandest cosmic processes to the smallest details of individual human lives. Not in the sense of a distant architect who designs a machine and lets it run. In the sense of an intimate, ongoing, moment-by-moment governance that extends to every falling sparrow, every turning leaf, every seemingly random encounter between strangers on a street. Jesus himself articulated this in the Gospel of Matthew. "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny?" he asked his disciples. "Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care, and even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So do not be afraid, you are worth more than many sparrows." This is not metaphor. This is a direct statement about the structure of reality. Every event, even one as insignificant as the death of a sparrow, is encompassed by a governing intelligence. Nothing falls outside the order. Nothing is truly random. Nothing is truly coincidental. Augustine of Hippo, the most influential theologian in Western Christianity, developed this into a comprehensive philosophy of time and meaning. In his Confessions, written at the end of the 4th century, Augustine argued that God exists outside time. Past, present, and future are simultaneous in the divine mind. God does not foresee the future the way a human being might predict tomorrow's weather through inference, extrapolation, educated guessing. God sees the future because, from the divine perspective, the future already exists. All of time is spread out before God like a landscape viewed from a great height. Every event, every encounter, every apparent coincidence is visible simultaneously, and the connections between events that appear random from within time are perfectly coherent from outside it. In The City of God, Augustine pressed the argument further. He examined the Roman concept of fortuna, the goddess of luck, the personification of chance, and rejected it entirely. There is no such thing as luck, Augustine argued. There is no such thing as fortune. There is only providence, the purposeful ordering of all events by a mind that perceives all of time at once. What appears random from within the flow of time is perfectly ordered from outside it. The Roman senator who attributes his success to fortune is like a man standing inside a vast tapestry, seeing only tangled threads and arbitrary colours. Step outside the tapestry, see it from the perspective that God occupies, and the tangled threads resolve into a coherent image. The connections that were invisible from within become obvious from without. Augustine did not merely believe in synchronicity. He believed that synchronicity was the fundamental texture of reality, and that the failure to perceive it was a failure of perspective, not a feature of the world. This is remarkably close to what physics calls the block universe, the interpretation of Einstein's relativity in which past, present, and future coexist as a single four-dimensional structure. In the block universe, time does not flow, it simply is, and events that appear sequential from within the block are simultaneous from outside it. Augustine arrived at this picture 15 centuries before Einstein, not through mathematics, but through contemplation of the nature of divine knowledge. And the implication for synchronicity is direct. If all of time exists simultaneously, then the connections between events separated in time are not mysterious. They are structural. They are features of a reality in which temporal separation is an appearance, not a fact. Thomas Aquinas, writing in the 13th century, 800 years after Augustine, systematized the doctrine of providence with philosophical precision that anticipates modern discussions with startling clarity. In the Summa Theologica, Aquinas argued that divine providence extends to every particular event, not just to general laws, not just to broad patterns, to every specific occurrence. He distinguished between the order of providence which is eternal, existing in the mind of God, and the execution of that order in time, which unfolds through what Aquinas called secondary causes. Secondary causes are the natural mechanisms, physical, chemical, biological, psychological, through which events occur. A stone falls because of gravity. A seed grows because of biology. A person makes a decision because of neural processes. These are real causes. Aquinas did not deny them, but he argued that these secondary causes are themselves governed by a higher cause, the providential order that coordinates them toward purposes that no individual secondary cause can perceive. This is a precise analogue of Bohm's implicate and explicate orders. The secondary causes are the explicate order, the visible, mechanical, causal processes that science studies. The providential order is the implicate order, the deeper reality that coordinates the explicate processes into patterns of meaning. The falling sparrow falls because of gravity, that is the secondary cause, the explicate mechanism. But the sparrow falls at this particular moment, in this particular place, witnessed by this particular person, as part of a pattern of meaning that the person may or may not perceive, and that is the providential order, the implicate coordination that connects events into significance. Meister Eckhart, the 14th century Dominican mystic, pushed the Christian understanding of hidden order even further. Eckhart taught that the ground of the soul and the ground of God are one ground, not similar, not analogous, one. In the deepest interior of human consciousness, Eckhart argued, there is a point of contact with the divine reality that underlies all things. He called it the funk line, the little spark, the place where the human soul and the divine ground are indistinguishable. From this ground, all things arise. From this ground, all events unfold. And from this ground, the connections between events, the meaningful coincidences, the providential encounters, the moments when the inner life of the soul and the outer life of the world suddenly align, are not mysterious. They are natural. They are what happens when reality is experienced from the ground rather than from the surface. Eckhart described this experience in a sermon that could serve as a phenomenology of synchronicity. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. My eye and God's eye are one eye, one seeing, one knowing, one love. When the boundary between the seer and the seen dissolves, when the perceiving consciousness and the perceived reality are recognized as aspects of a single ground, then the meaningful connections between inner and outer are not coincidences to be explained. They are the natural texture of undivided reality. A century before Eckhart, Bonaventure, the Franciscan theologian, had developed the concept of vestigia Dei, the traces or footprints of God in creation. Everything that exists, Bonaventure argued, bears the imprint of its creator. Every natural phenomenon is a sign, a trace of divine intelligence embedded in the fabric of the world. The world is not mute. It is speaking. It is communicating. Through its patterns and its structures and its coincidences, something about the nature of the intelligence that produced it. Bonaventure called this the Liber Naturae, the book of nature, and argued that learning to read it is a form of spiritual practice as rigorous and as revelatory as reading scripture. The person who perceives synchronicity in Bonaventure's framework is simply someone who has begun to read the book. Eckhart's language is mystical. Bonaventure's is theological, but their claims are structural. He is describing a level of reality deeper than the individual soul, deeper than the individual event from which both soul and event arise as manifestations of a single source. This is Bohm's implicate order in Christian mystical language. It is Pali's psychophysical unity in medieval German. The terminology differs. The structure is identical. The Eastern Orthodox tradition adds another dimension. Gregory Palamas, the 14th century Byzantine theologian, developed the distinction between God's essence and God's energies. God's essence is unknowable, unreachable, beyond all description, but God's energies, the divine activities that permeate creation, are everywhere. They saturate the physical world. They are present in every atom, every event, every moment. The created world, in Palamas's framework, is not separate from God. It is continuously sustained by divine energies that flow through it, like light through a crystal. And the person who purifies their perception through prayer and contemplation, the hesychast, tradition of silent, interior prayer, can begin to perceive these energies directly. They see the connections that others miss. They experience the providence that others dismiss as coincidence. Not because the connections were not there before, because the connections were always there. The hesychast has simply learned to see them. This has a direct parallel in the synchronicity research. The PEAR laboratory found that the anomalous effects were not uniformly distributed among operators. Some people produced larger effects than others. And the variable that best predicted performance was not intelligence, not belief, not personality. It was what Jung and his colleague Brenda Dunn called resonance. Operators who reported a sense of merging with the device, of dissolving the boundary between self and machine, of entering a state of absorbed attention that felt like meditation. These operators produced the strongest effects. The hesychast who perceives divine energies and the PEAR operator who resonates with a random event generator may be accessing the same capacity, the capacity to perceive and participate in connections that are always present but normally invisible. Buddhism approaches the same territory through a fundamentally different philosophical framework and arrives at conclusions that converge with the Christian tradition with remarkable precision. The Buddhist doctrine of pratityasamutpada dependent origination is not merely a philosophical principle. It is the central insight of the Buddha's enlightenment. According to the traditional accounts, on the night of his awakening under the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha Gautama perceived the entire web of causal interdependence that connects all phenomena. He saw that nothing exists independently. Every event arises in dependence upon conditions. Every condition arises in dependence upon further conditions. The web has no edges, no beginning, no end. It extends through all of space and all of time, and the perception of this web, in its totality, is what the Buddhist tradition calls enlightenment. The Buddha formalized this insight in the 12 nidanas, the 12 links of dependent origination, which describe how ignorance gives rise to volitional formations, which give rise to consciousness, which gives rise to name and form, which gives rise to the 6 sense bases, which give rise to contact, feeling, craving, clinging, becoming, birth, and suffering. Each link depends on the previous link. Remove any link, and the chain dissolves. But the chain is not merely linear, it is circular, each link feeding back into the others across lifetimes and across moments. And the chain is not merely individual, it extends outward from each being into the fabric of the universe, connecting every sentient being to every other sentient being through an unbroken web of conditioned arising. The 12 nidanas are not just a description of individual suffering, they are a map of the interconnectedness of all existence. And they imply that every event in the universe, every encounter, every seeming coincidence, every unexpected connection is a node in this web, arising from conditions that extend infinitely in every direction. The implications for synchronicity are immediate. If nothing arises independently, if every event is connected to every other event through a web of mutual dependence, then the concept of coincidence is not merely unlikely, it is incoherent. There are no coincidences in a universe of dependent origination. There are only connections that you can see and connections that you cannot see. The Pali term for the failure to see these connections is avidya, ignorance. Not ignorance of facts, ignorance of the web, ignorance of the deep structure of interconnection that underlies all phenomena. And the path of Buddhist practice, meditation, mindfulness, ethical conduct is designed precisely to dissolve this ignorance, to train the mind to perceive the connections that are already there. The Avatamsaka Sutra, the Flower Garland Sutra, contains what may be the most vivid description of universal interconnection in all of world. Literature. The sutra describes the Dharmadhatu, the realm of reality, as a domain in which every phenomenon contains every other phenomenon. A single grain of dust contains the entire universe. A single moment contains all of time. And the image that captures this is Indra's net, an infinite network of jewels, each jewel hanging at a node of the net, each jewel reflecting every other jewel, each reflection containing reflections of reflections to infinity. There is no center to the net. There is no periphery. Every point is equally connected to every other point. Every jewel is equally a reflection of the whole. This is not poetry. Or rather, it is poetry that happens to be a precise description of quantum non-locality. In an entangled quantum system, the state of each particle contains information about the state of every other particle. The whole is encoded in each part. Each part reflects the whole. Bohm's holographic universe, in which every region of space contains information about every other region, is Indra's net, expressed in the language of 20th century physics. The convergence is not approximate, it is exact. The Zen tradition makes the connection to synchronicity most explicit. Zen koans, the paradoxical questions used to train students toward direct perception of reality, are designed to shatter the rational mind's insistence on causal, linear, mechanical explanation. What is the sound of one hand clapping? What was your original face before your parents were born? Does a dog have Buddha nature? These questions have no logical answers. They are meant to provoke a crisis in the student's habitual mode of thinking, a crisis that, when resolved, reveals a mode of perception in which the boundaries between self and world, between cause and effect, between past and future, dissolve. The moment of resolution is called Satori, sudden awakening, and the accounts of Satori in the Zen literature are remarkably consistent. Practitioners describe a collapse of the boundary between inside and outside, a falling away of the sense that there is a self in here observing a world out there. In its place arises a perception of seamless unity, a direct experience that the self and the world are not two things, but one thing, one process, one unfolding. The 10th century Chinese master Yunmen was asked, "What is the Buddha?" He answered, "A dried shit stick. This is not vulgarity. It is a direct expression of the insight that Buddha nature, the ultimate reality, is not somewhere else, not in some special object or special moment. It is in everything. It is in the mundane as much as in the sacred. It is in the falling leaf as much as in the sitting meditator. There is nowhere. It is not, and therefore there is no event that is not connected to every other event. There is no encounter that is truly random. There is no coincidence that is truly empty of meaning. The Zen master who has resolved the koan lives in a state of perpetual astonishment, not because extraordinary things keep happening, but because the ordinary is revealed to be extraordinary. Every event is connected to every other event. Every moment contains the whole. Synchronicity, in the Zen framework, is not a special category of experience. It is the natural texture of reality perceived without the distortions of ignorance. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master who brought Buddhist mindfulness practice to the Western world, coined the term Interbeing to express this insight in contemporary language. Interbeing means that nothing exists by itself. A piece of paper interis with the tree it came from, the rain that nourished the tree, the cloud that produced the rain, the ocean that fed the cloud, the sun that evaporated the ocean. The paper contains the sun. The paper contains the ocean. Remove any one element, and the paper cannot exist. This is not metaphor. It is a description of dependent origination applied to everyday objects, and it implies that the connections between events in your life, the ones you call coincidences, are not coincidences. They are manifestations of interbeing. They are moments when the web of mutual dependence becomes briefly visible. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition adds a contemplative technology for accessing this web directly. The practice of shamatha, calm, abiding meditation, trains the mind to settle into stillness, like sediment settling in a glass of water. When the mind is still, the water becomes transparent. What was obscured by the agitation of thought becomes visible. The practice of vipassana insight meditation then examines what becomes visible with penetrating clarity. Together, these practices progressively dissolve the mind's habitual constructions, the rigid categories of self and other, inner and outer, cause and effect, and reveal the underlying nature of experience. Advanced practitioners in the Tibetan tradition report a state that the texts call nyam, meditative experiences that arise as the mind's habitual structures begin to dissolve. Among the most commonly reported, nyam are experiences of uncanny coincidence, meaningful connections between thoughts and events that arise with increasing frequency as the practitioner's concentration deepens. Thoughts manifest as external events. Intentions produce visible results without physical action. Dreams anticipate waking events with startling specificity. The Tibetan tradition does not regard these experiences as supernatural. It regards them as natural, the natural consequence of a mind that has begun to perceive the interconnected web of reality that was always present, but normally obscured by the noise of conceptual thought. The Dzogchen tradition, the highest teaching in the Nyingma school of Tibetan Buddhism, takes this further than any other contemplative system. Dzogchen describes the nature of mind as rigpa, pure awareness, luminous and empty, unconditioned by time or space. Rigpa is not something you achieve, it is something you recognize. It is your natural state, the state that existed before you were born, before your parents were born, before the universe was born. From the perspective of Rigpa, all phenomena arise as spontaneous display lundrup in Tibetan, appearing and dissolving in awareness, without any sense of separation between the observer and the observed, between the inner and the outer, between the meaningful thought and the meaningful event. Longchenpa, the 14th century Dzogchen master, described this spontaneous display with language that parallels Bohm's implicate order with extraordinary precision. Reality, Longchenpa wrote, is like a crystal ball, transparent, self-luminous, and containing all possible reflections within itself. The reflections do not come from outside the crystal. They arise from within it as natural expressions of its luminous nature. Similarly, the events of your life do not come from outside awareness. They arise within it as natural expressions of Rigpa's spontaneous creativity. And the connections between events, the synchronicities, are not imposed from outside by a cosmic engineer. They are intrinsic to the nature of awareness itself. They are what reality looks like when perceived without the distortion of dualistic thinking. Synchronicity, from the Dzogchen perspective, is what experience looks like when Rigpa is recognized. It is the natural state. It is the default. It is what was always there before ignorance obscured it. Hinduism weaves synchronicity into the fabric of existence through the concepts of karma, dharma, and lila. Karma, often misunderstood as a simple moral ledger, is, in its deepest formulation, the principle that every action reverberates through the web of existence, producing consequences that may manifest across vast stretches of time and space. The Bhagavad Gita describes karma as the web that connects all beings and all actions into a single fabric of meaning. No action is isolated. No event is random. Every experience you have is connected through karma to actions you have taken, intentions you have held, and relationships you have formed across lifetimes. Synchronicity, in the Hindu framework, is simply karma becoming visible. It is the moment when the web of connections usually hidden beneath the surface of daily life breaks through into conscious awareness. Dharma adds the dimension of cosmic order. Dharma is not merely duty or moral law. It is the structural principle of the universe, the pattern that holds reality together. The Rig Veda describes Dharma as Rita, the cosmic order that governs the rotation of the seasons, the movement of the stars, the cycle of birth and death, and the unfolding of individual human lives. Rita is not imposed from outside, it is intrinsic. It is the way reality naturally organizes itself when left undistorted. And the person who lives in accordance with Dharma, who aligns their actions with the cosmic order, experiences reality as a continuous flow of meaningful connection. Events arrive when they should. People appear when they are needed. Opportunities emerge precisely when the seeker is ready for them. This is not magic, it is alignment. It is the experience of living in harmony with a pattern that was always there. The Chandogya Upanishad expresses this with a formula that resonates directly with Bohm's implicate order. Tattvamasi, thou art that. The individual self and the universal self are identical. The Atman, the deepest core of your being, is Brahman, the ground of all reality. If this is true, if the deepest part of you is identical with the deepest part of everything, then the connections between your inner experience and outer events are not connections between separate things. They are resonances within a single thing. The thought that arises in your mind and the event that occurs in the world are both expressions of the same underlying reality, and their meaningful correlation is not coincidence. It is identity. Lila divine play adds a dimension that the other traditions hint at but rarely make explicit. In the Hindu understanding, the universe is not merely ordered, it is playful. The divine consciousness Brahman manifests the world not out of necessity, but out of creative exuberance. The universe is a game, a dance, a cosmic improvisation in which every event, every encounter, every apparent coincidence is a move in a play whose script was never written in advance. Lila does not mean that the universe is trivial. It means that the universe is creative, that the order underlying events is not rigid and mechanical, but fluid, improvisational, and responsive to the consciousness of those who participate in it. Synchronicity, in the framework of Lila, is a wink from the divine, a signal that the play is alive, that the script is being written in real time, and that you are not merely watching the performance. You are in it. Daoism offers perhaps the most practical framework. The Tao Te Ching, attributed to Laozi, written approximately 25 centuries ago, describes the Tao as the hidden pattern that governs the unfolding of all events. The Tao does not force. It does not command. It does not cause in the mechanical sense. It flows. And the sage, the person who aligns with the Tao, experiences life as a continuous unfolding of meaningful connections. Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, is the practice of aligning oneself so completely with the Tao's flow that the distinction between what you intend and what happens dissolves. You do not force synchronicities. You do not manufacture meaningful coincidences. You remove the obstacles, the rigidity, the grasping, the insistence on controlling outcomes that prevent synchronicity from occurring naturally. And when the obstacles are removed, synchronicity is not miraculous. It is ordinary. It is the way reality works when you stop interfering with it. Zhuangzi, the second great Taoist philosopher, illustrated this with stories that read like case studies in synchronicity. The cook whose knife never dulls because he cuts along the natural grain of reality. The swimmer who rides the current rather than fighting it. The craftsman whose creations emerge effortlessly because he works in harmony with the wood rather than imposing his will upon it. These are not fables about skill. They are descriptions of a way of being in which the inner and the outer, the intentional and the accidental, the personal and the cosmic are aligned. The cook does not cause the knife to find the joints in the meat. The joints are already there. The cook simply perceives them, and in perceiving them, acts in harmony with a pattern that was present all along. And then there is Zhuangzi's most famous passage, the butterfly dream. Once I dreamed I was a butterfly, fluttering here and there. I was conscious only of following my fancies as a butterfly, unaware that I was a man. Suddenly I awoke, and there I was, veritably myself again. Now I do not know whether I was then a man dreaming I was a butterfly, or whether I am now a butterfly dreaming I am a man. This is not a riddle about dreaming. It is a statement about the permeability of the boundary between inner and outer, between self and world, between mind and reality. If the boundary is permeable, if the dreaming mind and the waking world are not sealed compartments but communicating vessels, then the flow of meaning across that boundary is not an anomaly. It is a structural feature of a reality in which the inner and the outer were never truly separated in the first place. The butterfly dream is a Taoist description of the implicate order, the level of reality at which the distinction between the dreamer and the dream dissolves. The convergence across these traditions is not superficial. It is not a matter of cherry-picking compatible quotes from different cultures. It is structural, Every tradition examined here, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, Daoism, makes the same three claims. First, the visible world of separate events is not the deepest level of reality. There is a hidden order beneath the surface. Second, this hidden order connects events by meaning, not merely by mechanism. The connections are real, but they do not operate through the causal chains that classical physics describes. Third, the human being can learn to perceive this hidden order through prayer, through meditation, through contemplation, through aligning with the flow of reality. And when this perception awakens, what the modern world calls coincidence is revealed to be connection. What the skeptic calls randomness is revealed to be pattern. What the materialist calls noise is revealed to be signal. The specificity of the convergence deserves emphasis. It is not just that these traditions agree that reality is interconnected, a vague claim that almost anyone might make. It is that they agree on the structure of the interconnection. The Christian implicate order, Augustine's providential landscape of simultaneous time, Aquinas' coordination of secondary causes by a deeper ordering principle, Eckhart's shared ground of soul and God, Palamas' divine energies permeating every atom, the Buddhist implicate order-dependent origination's infinite web, Indra's net of mutually reflecting jewels, Zhou Chen's spontaneous display arising from the luminous ground of Rigpa, the Hindu implicate order Brahman as the ground from which all phenomena arise, Karma as the web connecting all actions across time, Leela as the creative play of a consciousness that is both the player and the played, the Daoist implicate order the Tao as the hidden pattern that governs effortless unfolding, Wu Wei as alignment with this pattern, the butterfly dream as the dissolution of the boundary between inner and outer. 4 traditions, 4 continents, 4 millennia, and the same structural insight. Reality has a surface and a depth. The surface is the world of separate events, separate causes, separate selves. The depth is a web of total interconnection in which separation is an illusion and meaning is structural. Synchronicity is what happens when the depth shows through the surface. When the implicate order, by whatever name you call it, becomes briefly visible in the explicate. These are not metaphors. They are descriptions of experience refined, tested, and transmitted across millennia by practitioners who devoted their entire lives to the investigation of reality. And they converge with remarkable precision on the same picture that quantum physics has begun to construct, a universe that is non-local, holistic, and saturated with meaning, a universe in which the separation between events is an illusion, a universe in which the connections are always there waiting to be perceived. The question that remains, the question that the final part of this investigation will confront, is what happens when we put it all together. The laboratory evidence, the quantum mechanics, the traditional testimony. What kind of universe do they collectively describe? And what does that universe mean for physics, for the traditions, and for you? Let us now put it all together. 3 lines of evidence, 3 entirely independent investigations of the same phenomenon, and the picture they collectively paint is one of the most radical and one of the most beautiful in the history of human inquiry. The first line is empirical. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory spent 28 years demonstrating that human consciousness can correlate with random physical systems without any known causal mechanism. The Global Consciousness Project placed random event generators around the world and found that they correlate with each other during events of mass emotional coherence with a cumulative statistical significance that exceeds the standards used to discover elementary particles. Bohm at Cornell found that human cognition can be influenced by events that have not yet occurred, that the future can reach backward and shape the present. Dean Radin found that the human body responds physiologically to emotionally significant stimuli before those stimuli are randomly selected and presented. The effect sizes are small, the replication record is mixed but positive, the meta-analyses are statistically significant, and the pattern is consistent. Consciousness and physical reality are connected in ways that no causal model can explain. The connections are causal. They are non-local. They are temporal, flowing backward as readily as forward. And they are amplified by emotional significance, relational bonding, and states of absorbed attention that resemble meditation. The second line is theoretical. Quantum mechanics, the most precisely tested theory in the history of science, has demonstrated that the universe is non-local. Bell's theorem proved it mathematically. Aspect, Clauser, and Zeilinger proved it experimentally. The 2022 Nobel Prize certified it institutionally. Entangled particles are connected across arbitrary distances with no signal, no force, no mechanism. The correlations between them are causal, exactly the kind of correlation that Jung described. Wheeler's delayed choice experiments demonstrated that the future can influence the past, that a measurement made after a photon has completed its journey can retroactively determine the path it took. Aharonov's two-state vector formalism provides a rigorous mathematical framework in which every quantum event is shaped by boundary conditions from both the past and the future. The quantum vacuum itself, the emptiest state of physical reality, exhibits long-range correlations that connect distant points in space-time. And David Bohm's implicate order offers a framework in which all of these phenomena find a natural home. A deeper level of reality in which everything is enfolded into everything else, in which separation is an appearance of the explicate order, and in which the connections between apparently separate events are not anomalies but structural features of the deep architecture of the universe. The third line is contemplative. Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Daoism traditions, spanning 4 continents and 4 millennia, independently describe a hidden order beneath the visible world. An order in which nothing is truly separate, an order in which events are connected by meaning, an order in which the human being, through spiritual practice, can learn to perceive the connections that are always present but normally invisible. Augustine's providential landscape of simultaneous time, Aquinas' coordination of secondary causes by a deeper ordering principle, Eckhart's shared ground of soul and God, the Buddhist web of dependent origination, Indra's net of mutually reflecting jewels, the Dzogchen recognition of Rigpa pure awareness in which inner and outer are undivided, the Hindu identity of Atman and Brahman, the Taoist flow of the Tao through all events. These are not vague spiritual sentiments. They are precise descriptions of a reality in which synchronicity is not an anomaly, but the natural texture of existence. 3 lines, 3 methods, 3 communities of investigators who, for the most part, have never spoken to each other. And they converge on the same picture, a universe in which meaning is not projected onto reality by the human mind, but woven into reality at the deepest level. A universe in which the connections between events are real, are causal, non-local, and meaningful. A universe in which synchronicity is not a cognitive illusion. It is a window. But intellectual honesty demands that we confront the objections, and the objections are serious. The first and most powerful objection is confirmation bias. The human brain is a pattern recognition engine. It evolved to detect patterns, faces in clouds, predators in shadows, threats in ambiguous stimuli, because pattern detection confers survival advantages. A brain that sees a pattern where none exists wastes a small amount of energy. A brain that misses a real pattern, a predator, a threat, a source of food, dies. Evolution selected for brains that overdetect patterns. And this means that human beings are systematically prone to seeing meaningful connections where none exist. We remember the hits, the time we thought of someone and they called, and forget the thousands of times we thought of someone and they did not call. We notice the striking coincidence and ignore the vast background of non-coincidences against which it occurred. This is real. This is well documented. And for many apparent synchronicities, it is almost certainly the correct explanation. But confirmation bias does not explain the laboratory evidence. Random event generators do not have confirmation bias. They do not remember hits and forget misses. They produce binary data that is analyzed by automated statistical algorithms that are immune to selective memory. The PEAR data, the Global Consciousness Project data, the Bohm data, the Radin data, these are not anecdotes filtered through human pattern recognition. They are measurements. And the measurements show effects that are small but statistically significant, consistent, and replicable across decades, laboratories, and experimental designs. Confirmation bias explains why individuals overestimate the frequency of synchronicities in their personal lives. It does not explain why random event generators deviate from chance when humans intend them to. The second objection is the file drawer problem, the concern that experiments showing no effect are never published, while experiments showing an effect are. This would inflate the apparent evidence base, making a non-existent effect appear real. This is a legitimate concern in all of experimental science, and it applies to the synchronicity research. But meta-analysts have addressed it directly. The Bohm meta-analysis, for example, included a file drawer analysis that calculated how many unpublished null results would be needed to reduce the observed effect to non-significance. The answer was over 500 unpublished null studies, an implausibly large number for a research area, with only a few dozen active laboratories. The Global Consciousness Project's data is open source, anyone can analyze it, and the effects do not depend on which analytical method is used. The file drawer problem is a valid concern, but it does not account for the magnitude or consistency of the evidence. The third objection is the most fundamental. Even if the effects are real, even if consciousness really does correlate with random physical systems, the leap from laboratory anomalies to meaningful synchronicities in human life is enormous. The PEAR effects are 1 part in 10,000. The Bohm effects are a few percentage points above chance. These are tiny deviations. How do you get from a 0.01% deviation in a random number generator to the experience of thinking about a long-lost friend and having them call you within minutes? The laboratory effects and the lived experience seem separated by many orders of magnitude. The fourth objection comes from within physics itself: quantum decoherence. Even physicists sympathetic to the connection between quantum mechanics and consciousness acknowledge that quantum effects, superposition, entanglement, non-locality are extraordinarily fragile. They are observed most clearly in isolated systems at extremely low temperatures, shielded from environmental noise. The human brain is the opposite of this: warm, wet, noisy, bombarded by electromagnetic interference and thermal fluctuations. How could quantum coherence survive in such an environment long enough to produce the effects that synchronicity seems to require? The decoherence objection is serious because it attacks the physical plausibility of the proposed mechanism. Even if the implicate order exists, even if non-locality is real, the warm biological brain may be too noisy to access it. But recent research has complicated this objection. Studies in quantum biology, a field that barely existed 20 years ago, have demonstrated that quantum coherence can persist in warm biological systems far longer than physicists predicted. The quantum efficiency of photosynthesis, in which energy is transferred through molecular complexes with near-perfect efficiency, appears to exploit quantum coherence at biological temperatures. The avian compass, the mechanism by which migratory birds navigate using Earth's magnetic field, involves quantum entanglement between radical pairs in the cryptochrome proteins of the bird's retina. And the Penrose-Hameroff-Ochoa theory proposes that quantum coherence in neural microtubules protein structures within neurons that are shielded from thermal noise by their geometry could sustain quantum effects long enough to influence neural processing. None of this proves that the brain is a quantum device, but it demonstrates that the categorical dismissal of quantum effects in biological systems, the assumption that decoherence makes them impossible, is premature. Biology may have found ways to protect quantum coherence that physicists did not anticipate. And if it has, the bridge between quantum non-locality and human synchronicity may be narrower than the decoherence objection assumes. These objections are valid and must be taken seriously. The honest answer is that we do not know how to bridge the gap completely. Bohm's implicate order provides a theoretical framework in which such a bridge could exist, but the framework is not yet quantitative. It does not predict the magnitude of synchronistic effects in everyday life. It does not explain why some synchronicities are dramatic and others are subtle. It does not account for why synchronicities seem to cluster during certain life periods, transitions, crises, spiritual practice, and diminish during others. The theory is suggestive, not definitive, and intellectual honesty requires acknowledging the difference. But consider this. The laboratory effects, though small in magnitude, have a feature that is deeply relevant to the synchronicity question. They are amplified by emotional significance. The PEAR bonded pair effect, 6 times larger than individual effects, suggests that emotional connection magnifies the anomalous correlation between consciousness and physical systems. The Global Consciousness Project finds its strongest effects during events of intense collective emotion. Bohm's precognition effect appears only for emotionally arousing stimuli, not for neutral ones. Radon's presentiment effect is strongest for emotionally provocative images. The pattern is consistent, emotion amplifies the effect, and the synchronicities that people report in their daily lives are overwhelmingly emotionally charged. They occur during moments of grief, love, decision, crisis, transformation. They involve people we care about, questions that matter to us, symbols that carry personal significance. If the amplification factor scales with emotional intensity, and the laboratory evidence suggests that it does, then the gap between tiny laboratory effects and dramatic life synchronicities may not be as large as it initially appears. The laboratory measures the baseline. Life provides the amplifier. It is worth noting that Pauli himself, the Nobel physicist who collaborated with Jung, was famous among his colleagues for an extraordinary personal manifestation of synchronicity. The Pauli effect, named with a mixture of humour and unease by the physicists who witnessed it, was the tendency for experimental equipment to malfunction or break whenever Pauli was nearby. Instruments would fail, glass apparatus would shatter, circuits would short. The incidents were so frequent and so well documented that experimentalists like Otto Stern banned Pauli from their laboratories. The most famous incident occurred at the University of Göttingen, where a sensitive piece of equipment inexplicably collapsed at the precise moment that Pauli's train passed through the Göttingen railway station. He was not even in the building, merely passing through the city. The physicists who knew Pauli treated the Pauli effect as a running joke, but Pauli himself took it seriously. He saw it as evidence of exactly the kind of psychophysical correlation that synchronicity describes, the causal connection between a person's psychological state and physical events in their environment. The greatest theoretical physicist of his generation believed, on the basis of his own experience, that consciousness and physical reality are coupled in ways that physics has not yet described. There is also a selection effect that works in favor of synchronicity rather than against it. Confirmation bias selects for memorable coincidences, yes, but the same bias operates in scientific observation. The physicist who discovers a new particle does not discover it in the noise of every experiment. She discovers it in the rare events, the outliers, the statistical fluctuations that rise above the background. The particle was always there, but it only becomes visible when conditions align, when the energy is right, the detector is sensitive enough, and the background noise is low enough to let the signal through. Synchronicities may work the same way. The implicate order is always there. The connections are always present, but they only become visible when conditions align, when the emotional intensity is high enough, the attention is focused enough, and the habitual noise of the conceptual mind is quiet enough to let the signal through. This does not prove that synchronicities are real, but it suggests that the apparent rarity of dramatic synchronicities is not evidence against their reality. It is exactly what you would expect if synchronicity is a real but subtle phenomenon that requires specific conditions to become perceptible. Now let us trace the connections to the investigations we have conducted before, the threads that weave this series into the larger tapestry of everything we have explored. Non-locality was the foundation of our exploration of the distance, illusion, the discovery that spatial separation at the quantum level is not what it appears. Entangled particles separated by kilometers behave as though they are in the same place. Distance, we found, is an explicate order appearance that dissolves in the implicate order. Synchronicity extends this insight from space to meaning. Just as distance does not prevent quantum correlation, distance does not prevent meaningful correlation. The friend who calls when you think of them may be across the world. The symbol that appears in 3 unrelated contexts may span 3 different locations. If non-locality applies to meaning as well as to measurement, and the evidence suggests that it does, then synchronicity is the experiential face of quantum non-locality. Retrocausality was the engine of our exploration of the future self, the investigation of whether the future can reach backward and influence the present. Wheeler's delayed choice experiment proved that it can. At the quantum level, Aharonov's formalism made it mathematically rigorous. Bohm's experiment suggested that it operates in human cognition, and Radon's presentiment experiments showed that it operates in the human body. Synchronicity, in many of its most striking forms, involves retrocausal elements, dreams that anticipate future events, intuitions that prove correct, choices that seem guided by knowledge of outcomes that have not yet occurred. The Future Self series explored the physics. The synchronicity investigation reveals the experiential consequence. You may be receiving information from the future, not as science fiction, as physics. The observer effect, the discovery that conscious observation influences quantum outcomes, was the core of our investigation into the quantum observer and the evil eye. The PEAR experiments extend the observer effect from the microscopic to the macroscopic. If conscious observation can collapse a quantum superposition, the PEAR data suggests that conscious intention can also influence random physical systems. Synchronicity may be the observer effect scaled up, the influence of consciousness on the physical world, operating not through known forces but through the same acausal, non-local connections that govern quantum entanglement. Déjà vu, our investigation into the science of the already seen, may be a microsynchronicity. We explored the possibility that déjà vu is a momentary perception of the block universe, a brief glimpse of a future moment that the conscious mind has already encountered at some deeper level. If that is correct, then déjà vu and synchronicity share a common mechanism. Both involve the perception of connections across time. Both involve information arriving from a temporal location that the linear mind has not yet reached. Déjà vu is private synchronicity, a meaningful connection between the present moment and a future moment that only you can perceive. Synchronicity is public déjà vu, a meaningful connection between inner experience and outer events that manifests visibly in the world. They are the same phenomenon operating at different scales. The Timeless Existence series our exploration of what it means that physics describes a reality outside of time provides the deepest context for synchronicity. If the block universe is real, if past, present, and future coexist as a single four-dimensional structure, then the meaningful connections between events separated in time are not mysterious. They are geometric. Events that appear sequential from within time are adjacent in the block. The dream that anticipates tomorrow's event and tomorrow's event are not separated by a night of sleep. They are neighbors in the block universe connected by proximity, not by causation. Augustine understood this 15 centuries ago. The block universe is his providential landscape expressed in the language of relativity. The Dark Forest series, our investigation into the Fermi paradox and the silence of the cosmos, raises a question that synchronicity may help answer. If the universe is structured by meaning, if the implicate order connects events through significance rather than mechanism, then the silence of the cosmos may not indicate absence. It may indicate a form of connection that our instruments cannot detect. We search for electromagnetic signals, radio waves, laser pulses, infrared signatures. But if the deepest connections in the universe are non-local and acausal, if meaning is a connective principle that operates through the implicate order rather than through space-time, then the silence is not evidence of isolation. It is evidence that we are listening on the wrong frequency. The universe may be saturated with connection. We may simply not have built the right receiver. The biological antenna series explored the possibility that the human body is a receiver tuned to frequencies of information that transcend the 5 conventional senses. The PEAR bonded pair effect, in which emotionally connected operators produce anomalous effects 6 times larger than individuals, suggests that the antenna is relational. It is not just the individual brain that receives. It is the connection between brains, the emotional bond, the shared history, the interpersonal resonance that amplifies reception. Synchronicities are often relational. They involve the people closest to you. They involve connections that are emotionally charged. The biological antenna may be tuned not just to physical frequencies but to relational ones. Frequencies of love, grief, longing, and shared meaning that carry information through the implicate order. Information leakage, the subject of our investigation into dreams and precognition, is the mechanism by which information from the implicate order seeps into the explicate order. We explored how dreams may be channels through which information about future events, distant events, and enfolded patterns leaks into conscious awareness. Synchronicity is information leakage waking up. It is the same process that operates in precognitive dreams, operating now in waking life. The meaningful coincidence is a waking dream, a moment when the boundary between the implicate and the explicate becomes momentarily transparent, and information that is normally hidden flows through. The universal neural network, our exploration of the possibility that consciousness forms a distributed network analogous to a brain, provides a framework for the Global Consciousness Project's findings. If individual consciousnesses are nodes in a larger network, connected not by wires but by quantum correlations, then the coherence effects measured by Nelson's random event generators are exactly what you would expect. When millions of nodes focus on the same event, the network becomes coherent. The random data becomes less random. The implicate order, activated by collective attention, shows through. And the vibration series, our investigation into the physics of resonance, frequency, and the vibrational nature of reality, provides the language for understanding how synchronicity operates. Resonance is the mechanism by which systems at a distance can influence each other without direct contact. A tuning fork struck in one room will cause a tuning fork of the same frequency in another room to vibrate not through a pushed signal but through resonant coupling. If consciousness and physical reality resonate at a common frequency, If the implicate order is a vibrational field that couples conscious attention to physical events, then synchronicity is resonance. It is the moment when your inner frequency and the outer frequency of events match, and the resonant coupling produces a correlation that has no causal explanation but is perfectly real. The CERN hidden layer, our exploration of what the Large Hadron Collider reveals about the invisible architecture of reality, adds another dimension. CERN's experiments demonstrate that the visible universe is a thin surface layer over a deeper structure of fields, forces, and symmetries that are invisible to direct observation. The Higgs field permeates all of space but cannot be seen, only inferred from its effects. The hidden layers of reality that particle physics has uncovered, virtual particles, quantum fields, broken symmetries, are the physicists' version of the implicate order. They are the deep structure from which the visible world unfolds. And synchronicity, in this context, is a moment when the hidden layer shows through, when the deep structure of the universe produces a visible effect in the surface layer of everyday experience. The Evolution series, our investigation into whether evolution operates as a quantum algorithm, suggests that the creative intelligence, visible in synchronicity, may be the same intelligence that drives biological evolution. If evolution is not purely random mutation plus natural selection, but involves a deeper organizing principle, a quantum search algorithm that explores the fitness landscape with an efficiency that random processes cannot match, then the same organizing principle may be at work in synchronicity. The meaningful coincidence and the elegant adaptation may share a common source: the implicate order's tendency to produce coherent, purposeful patterns from apparent chaos. Every thread connects. Every series was a different angle on the same underlying reality, and synchronicity may be the clearest window into that reality, because synchronicity is not abstract. It is not a thought experiment. It is not a laboratory measurement that only physicists can interpret. It is an experience that almost every human being has had, an experience that is intimate, personal, immediate, and that, according to the convergence of quantum physics and contemplative wisdom, may be the most direct evidence available to the individual human being that the universe is not a machine, that it is a web of meaning, that you are not a separate observer watching a random world. You are a participant in a reality that is speaking to you in symbols, in coincidences, in the impossible precision of events that arrive exactly when they are needed. But we must hold this insight with open hands. The evidence is suggestive, not conclusive. The theoretical framework is promising, not proven. The gap between laboratory effects and lived experience is real and has not been fully bridged. The objections, confirmation bias, the file draw problem, the magnitude gap are legitimate and must not be dismissed. Science has not proven that synchronicity is real in the way that it has proven that entanglement is real. The laboratory anomalies are real. The quantum non-locality is proven. The traditional testimony is vast and consistent. But the final synthesis, the definitive proof that meaningful coincidences in human life are manifestations of quantum non-locality operating through an implicate order, has not yet been achieved. And perhaps that is the most honest and the most interesting place to stand, on the edge, between proof and possibility, between the data that says something is happening and the theory that has not yet explained what, between the laboratory that measures a tiny deviation and the life that experiences a shattering coincidence, between the physicist who proves non-locality and the mystic who lives it. Jung himself stood on this edge. He did not claim to have solved the mystery. He claimed to have identified it, to have given it a name, a definition, and an empirical foundation. He called it the most important concept he had ever introduced, and he spent the last decades of his life trying to understand it, corresponding with Pauli, collecting clinical cases, reading physics, reading theology, reading mythology. He never arrived at a final answer. He arrived at a better question. The question is not whether coincidences happen. They do. The question is not whether they are sometimes meaningful. They are. The question is not whether quantum mechanics describes a causal connections. It does. The question is, what kind of universe produces all of this simultaneously? A universe in which particles are connected without causes, in which the future can influence the past, in which consciousness correlates with random physical systems, in which the traditions of every civilization describe a hidden order of meaning, and in which you, sitting here right now, have experienced moments so precisely, so impossibly, so personally meaningful that you could not dismiss them no matter how hard you tried. What kind of universe is this? It may be the universe that Bohm described, a universe with an implicate order, a deeper reality beneath the surface, a web of enfolded connections from which the visible world unfolds like a flower opening in slow motion. It may be the universe that Augustine described, a universe in which all of time exists simultaneously in the mind of God, and the connections between events that appear random from within time are perfectly coherent from outside it. It may be the universe that the Avatamsaka Sutra described, a universe in which every jewel reflects every other jewel, every part contains the whole, and the web of interconnection has no center and no edge. It may be the universe that Zhuangzi described, a universe in which the boundary between the dreamer and the dream is permeable, and the flow of meaning across that boundary is the most natural thing in the world. Or it may be something that none of them fully captured, something that requires both the precision of physics and the depth of contemplative insight to approach, something that neither science alone nor tradition alone can fully express. Something that emerges only in the conversation between them, in the space where Bell's equations and Eckhart's sermons, where aspects, photons, and the Buddha's dependent origination, where random event generators and the Tao's silent flow all point in the same direction. That direction is toward a universe that cares, not cares in the sentimental sense, not cares the way a human being cares about another human being, cares in the structural sense, a universe in which meaning is not an accident of biology, not a projection of the pattern-hungry brain, not an illusion produced by confirmation bias, but a fundamental feature of reality itself. A universe that is organized, at its deepest level, by something that has no name in physics and many names in the traditions: Providence, Dharma, Tao, Karma, Leela, the implicate order, the psychophysical unity, the ground of being. This is, perhaps, the most radical claim in this entire series. Physics has spent 4 centuries carefully excising meaning from its description of reality. The Newtonian revolution replaced purpose with mechanism. The Darwinian revolution replaced design with selection. The thermodynamic revolution replaced direction with entropy. At each step, meaning the sense that events happen for reasons, that the universe has purposes, that existence is significant, was pushed further to the margins. By the 20th century, the dominant scientific worldview held that meaning is entirely a human projection, a story the brain tells itself to cope with a reality that is, at bottom, meaningless. And yet, quantum mechanics, the most successful theory in the history of science, the theory that underlies every electronic device, every chemical reaction, every biological process, describes a universe in which the observer cannot be separated from the observed, in which particles are connected without causes, in which the future can shape the past, in which the whole is encoded in every part. This is not a universe from which meaning has been excised. This is a universe in which the preconditions for meaning, connection, wholeness, participation, non-locality are woven into the foundations. The traditions did not need quantum mechanics to know this. They arrived at it through a different method, not measurement but contemplation, not experiment but practice, not instruments but attention. And they described a universe in which meaning is not a human projection but a cosmic fact. A universe in which the connections between events are not illusions but features. A universe in which synchronicity, the impossible, undeniable, personally shattering experience of meaningful coincidence, is not the brain malfunctioning. It is the brain, for once, functioning correctly, perceiving what is actually there. We stand, at this moment, at a remarkable convergence. The physics points one way, the traditions point the same way, the laboratory evidence points the same way, and your own experience, the synchronicities you have lived through, the coincidences you could not explain, the moments when the universe seemed to be speaking directly to you points the same way. No single line of evidence is conclusive, but taken together, they constitute something that demands serious attention. The possibility that the universe is meaningful, that it was always meaningful, that the meaning was not added by human minds but discovered by them, that the connections between events in your life are as real as the connections between entangled particles and as fundamental. You have felt it, you have experienced it, the moment when everything aligned, when the right person said the right thing at the right time, when the symbol you needed appeared without being summoned, when the door opened exactly when you were ready to walk through it. You called it a coincidence. The traditions call it the normal functioning of a universe that is connected by meaning. And quantum physics, though it has not yet proven the traditions right, has proven something that the traditions always assumed, that the universe is not a collection of separate parts, that the connections between things are deeper than the things themselves, that the web is real. The web has always been real. Bell proved it with mathematics. Aspect proved it with photons. The mystics proved it with their lives. And you prove it every time you experience a coincidence so precise, so personal, so impossibly timed that your rational mind says impossible and something deeper says of course. That something deeper is not superstition. It is not wishful thinking. It is not the brain's tendency to see patterns in noise. It is the part of you that is still connected to the implicate order, the part that remembers what the explicate order has taught you to forget, that you were never separate, that the connections were never broken, that the meaning was never projected. It was always there. It was always real. Pay attention. That is the practical instruction that emerges from 3,000 years of contemplative practice and a century of quantum physics. Pay attention to the coincidences, not with credulity, not believing that every random event is a cosmic message, but with curiosity, with the open, attentive, non-grasping awareness that the Buddhists call mindfulness, that the Christians call contemplative prayer, that the Daoists call Wu Wei. The PEAR experiments showed that focused attention strengthens the connection between consciousness and physical systems. The contemplative traditions teach that focused attention reveals connections that were always present. The instruction from both sides is the same. Attend, notice, be present. Not to manufacture synchronicities, they cannot be manufactured, but to perceive them when they arise, to receive the signal that the implicate order is always broadcasting, to read the book that Bonaventure said nature has always been writing. And when the synchronicity arrives, when the coincidence is so precise, so personal, so impossibly perfect that it takes your breath away, do not explain it away. Do not dismiss it as confirmation bias. Do not file it under things that happened for no reason. Sit with it. Feel the vertigo. Feel the crack in the wall of the ordinary. Because that crack is not a malfunction. It is a window into the real structure of the universe, the structure that physics measures, that the traditions describe, and that your own experience confirms. The universe is not what you were told it was. It is not a machine. It is not random. It is not indifferent. It is a web of light and meaning and connection, and you are not observing it from the outside. You are woven into it. Every thread that connects a distant star to a distant galaxy connects, with equal reality, the thought in your mind to the event in your world. The separation was always the illusion. The connection was always the truth. And synchronicity, that strange, beautiful, impossible, undeniable experience, is the moment when you remember.